What happens when one of TV's most blunt, no-nonsense voices collides with one of Hollywood's most respected and intelligent actors? Imagine a conversation so tense, so unexpected, that it leaves an empty chair on set and an audience frozen in disbelief. But before we get into the moment everything went off the rails, let me ask you this. Have you ever watched an interview that started off friendly and spiraled into total chaos within minutes? Because that's exactly what you're about to experience. At first, the atmosphere felt completely normal. The lights were on, the cameras were rolling, and Bryan Cranston walked onto the stage to promote his newest project. The applause was genuine, full of warmth and admiration. He greeted everyone with that trademark charm, the same smile that once made him the lovable dad in one sitcom and later turned him into one of the most frightening characters in television history. Everything seemed fine on the surface, but if you were paying close attention, there was already a quiet tension creeping into the air. Joy Behar, seated comfortably in her usual spot, welcomed him back with a grin and a familiar sense of confidence. He thanked her and settled into his chair, ready for what he assumed would be a standard conversation about his latest film. She began by describing his role, a journalist uncovering government corruption, and asked whether playing a character like that carried any weight or sense of responsibility in the current political and social climate. It was a fair question, but what happened next is where the mood subtly began to shift. Cranston answered thoughtfully, explaining that storytelling has always been a powerful mirror for society, and that his character's job was to ask difficult questions and challenge those in power. He emphasized that this, in his opinion, was the true purpose of journalism. That word, challenge, hung in the air for just a moment too long, and Joy picked up on it immediately. Her tone changed ever so slightly as she pointed out that there can be a thin line between questioning authority and spreading misinformation. You could almost hear the audience lean in. Cranston paused, clearly choosing his next words carefully. He explained that real journalism should be about uncovering truth, not simply reinforcing existing beliefs. Joy brushed that aside, arguing that many people use just asking questions as an excuse to promote baseless theories and dangerous ideas. The tension was no longer subtle. The other hosts exchanged quick glances, sensing that the conversation was drifting away from the film and into much deeper territory. Cranston remained calm but firm. He clarified that he wasn't defending wild theories or denying science, only the importance of healthy skepticism, especially toward institutions that haven't always been transparent with the public. That was the moment the energy in the room changed completely. Joy crossed her arms and warned that questioning things like vaccines, elections, and basic science isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. The audience went silent. He responded that history shows institutions have lied, made serious mistakes, and covered up the truth. According to him, the real damage to society comes when people are told to never question anything at all. Now the wheels were fully spinning. One of the other hosts tried to steer the conversation back to the movie, but Joy wasn't letting go. She pushed harder, saying that when educated and respected figures talk like this, it gives credibility to the wrong people. Cranston leaned forward, his jaw tense, asking what exactly she meant by talk like this. She fired back, claiming that some questions may seem innocent on the surface, but are actually coded attempts to undermine established facts. That's when he asked the question that froze the studio. Who actually decides what is true? The government, the media, or the public? He pointed out that none of those groups have a perfect record. Joy threw up her hands, accusing him of fueling the idea that the media is the enemy. He denied that, but stated plainly that major stories have been misreported before, and when the public notices, they lose trust. A reaction he believes is completely justified. Her response was instant and sharp. Climate change is real, vaccines work, and people who refuse to accept that reality are the problem. And that's when everything truly spiraled. Joy's voice cut through the silence as she stated that the planet is round and that certain truths simply aren't open for debate. Cranston didn't hesitate. He made it clear that he wasn't denying established facts at all, but in her eyes, even raising these points created room for the people who did. She accused him of unintentionally empowering those who fall into dangerous belief systems by constantly pushing the idea that authority should be questioned. That's when his tone sharpened. He insisted that what he was promoting wasn't rebellion, but critical thinking. To him, there was a clear difference between thoughtful skepticism and outright rejection of reality, and he refused to let those two ideas be blended into one. From Joy's perspective, though, it was a slippery slope. The crowd sat frozen. You could tell the co-hosts wanted to vanish, and yet somehow the tension was still building. Cranston slowly shook his head and told her that this, right here, was the real issue. He believed she had become so sure of her own side that she couldn't even imagine the possibility that someone with a different view might not be an extremist. Joy shot back instantly, saying she considers valid perspectives all the time. What she refuses to accept is the idea that every opinion deserves equal weight. Some positions are supported by facts and data, she argued, while others are powered purely by fear or misinformation. And then came the question she couldn't avoid any longer. Who decides what counts as truth? Cranston asked. He pushed the point further, questioning why institutions that have already misled the public in the past should still receive unquestioning trust. Joy leaned forward, her voice rising. If people stop trusting experts, she said, then society descends into chaos. Anyone can believe anything. Real medicine gets replaced by internet rumors. Truth becomes meaningless. He fired back that her example was an exaggeration, and she knew it. He wasn't telling people to ignore doctors or professionals. He was saying that once credibility is damaged, it must be rebuilt, not demanded. Joy accused him of being a significant reason that trust has been eroded in the first place. That's when he pointed right at the table and said, they didn't lose credibility because of him. They lost it because they lied, contradicted themselves, and covered up mistakes instead of owning them. Sensing the disaster unfolding on live television, another host desperately tried to redirect the conversation back to the movie, mentioning that Cranston's character wrestles with similar moral questions in the film. But Joy wasn't finished. She demanded one specific, undeniable example of what he was accusing these institutions of doing. No more vague statements. Name one. With a frustrated laugh, he asked if she honestly expected him to list every single failure on air. When she doubled down and insisted on just one, he delivered it without hesitation. He pointed to the claim of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, a narrative pushed as fact, amplified by major media, and used to justify an entire war that cost countless lives, all based on information that turned out to be false. And that, he reminded her, wasn't ancient history. Joy quickly dismissed it, saying it was decades ago and irrelevant now. He stared at her in disbelief, questioning whether the public was just supposed to forget something like that ever happened and move on as if nothing was learned. She argued that people have to move forward, and that one failure doesn't erase the value of expert knowledge. He clarified once again, he wasn't trying to erase it. He was demanding accountability, transparency, and honesty instead of denial and spin. Her arms folded tighter as she warned that while people sit around questioning everything, false information spreads, people refuse life-saving care, and democracy itself becomes unstable. Cranston countered by saying that maybe people don't trust elections simply because they've witnessed things that didn't make sense and were mocked for even noticing. A sharp gasp rippled through the room. Joy pressed her hand to her head in disbelief, asking if he was really going to step into that territory on air. He calmly replied that dismissing concerned people and labeling them as crazy only deepens the divide. According to her, though, those fears were built on lies. The cases had failed. The audits had been done. Every channel had confirmed the final results. At some point, she said, reality has to be accepted. And right there, with the audience breathless, the hosts paralyzed, and the air thick with unspoken consequences. The conversation reached its breaking point. Cranston pushed back one final time, saying that eventually you have to wonder why so many people no longer believe the official story. Was it really because they were all ignorant, or was it because the very institutions demanding trust had shattered it time and again? That was when Joy abruptly stood up, her chair screeching across the floor. The entire room tensed. The host stared. The cameras didn't cut. She told him she was done. Done with the conversation. Done pretending that truth and fantasy deserved the same platform. Done coddling people who refused to accept reality. Cranston remained seated for a brief second, then rose as well, asking calmly what she was actually done with. The discussion, or the fact that she didn't like what she was hearing? He said he wasn't asking her to baby anyone. He was asking her to recognize why trust had collapsed in the first place, and that doing so would require admitting that the institutions she defended weren't flawless. "Nothing is flawless," she snapped back. "But the systems work. Science works, journalism works, democracy works. Even when mistakes happen," she said, "the system is supposed to self-correct. That's the entire point." Cranston looked at her and asked the real question. Does it actually correct itself, or does it simply protect itself by closing ranks and avoiding accountability? From his perspective, he said, there was far more self-preservation than self-reflection. Joy took a step back, shaking her head, overwhelmed. She said she couldn't do this anymore. The other hosts moved to their feet, one of them urging her to just take a breath. But she kept her eyes on Cranston and accused him of walking onto the show with charm, then using his platform to give legitimacy to conspiracy thinkers, all under the cover of just asking questions. He raised his voice now, too. Since when did asking questions become forbidden? Since when did skepticism become dangerous? She fired back that questioning stops being noble when it's no longer about finding truth, but about reinforcing whatever people already want to believe. Cranston spread his hands and repeated the question she couldn't seem to answer. Who decides what's a legitimate concern and what's just bias? Every supposed arbiter of truth, he argued, had been compromised or proven wrong at some point. "So what's your solution?" Joy demanded. "No standards? No expertise? Just people believing whatever feels good to them?" He answered without hesitation. The solution, he said, was honesty, transparency, admitting mistakes instead of burying them, having difficult conversations instead of silencing people, treating the public like adults capable of handling complexity, not children who need to be told what to think. She let out a bitter laugh, saying that was a nice fantasy. Had he seen what people do when they're left to figure things out themselves? They follow dangerous trends, fall for lies, and destroy everything in their path. He shook his head, calling her view of humanity deeply cynical. Sure, some people make terrible choices, he admitted, but most are just trying to find the truth in a world where they feel deceived. And instead of guiding them, instead of rebuilding broken trust, voices like hers only scold and shame them. "People like me?" she repeated sharply. "People who care about facts. People who care about protecting lives and democracy." "No," he replied, his voice suddenly quiet but far more powerful than his shouting. "People like you who care more about being right than about understanding why others don't agree with you." That single sentence hit harder than anything else he had said. The studio went completely still. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the audience seemed afraid to breathe. Joy stared at him speechless for a long moment before letting out a low, defeated laugh. But this time, all the fire was gone. She said she had been in that seat for years. She had debated people with extreme views. She had sat across from individuals she fundamentally disagreed with and had still managed to have the conversation. She had always tried to find common ground. One of the other hosts began to say her name, but she raised her hand to stop them. Then she gestured between them, at him, at the table, at the space that now felt miles wide. This, she said, was not a debate. In her eyes, it was him implying nothing could be trusted, that every institution was corrupt, that every expert was lying, and then painting her as the unreasonable one for pushing back. Cranston, clearly strained, responded that she was twisting his words. He never said every institution was rotten or that every expert was a liar, and that is exactly where the moment tipped from heated to unforgettable. Cranston tried to clarify himself one more time. He said he never claimed every institution was corrupt, only that they had made serious mistakes and, in doing so, lost the trust of the public. And that trust had to be earned back. If she couldn't hear the difference, he told her quietly, then that wasn't on him. Without saying another word, Joy gathered her papers, aligned them on the table with sharp taps, and then turned directly to the main camera. The studio collectively held its breath. She said she needed to speak to the audience at home. She reminded them that she had always been honest on this show. Honest about her views, her values, and what she believed in. Around her, the other hosts traded uneasy glances. Somewhere behind the scenes, producers were probably panicking, but she didn't waver. She said she could no longer sit there and play along as if both sides of this conversation carried the same weight. She would not give airtime to ideas she viewed as genuinely harmful, even if they were disguised in intellectual language about skepticism and questioning. Then she turned back to Cranston and acknowledged his talent, saying she had always respected his work. But what he was doing in that moment, whether he realized it or not, she believed was dangerous, and she refused to be part of it. He looked genuinely shocked. He insisted he wasn't trying to cause harm. He was simply trying to talk honestly about why so many people no longer believed in the systems meant to protect them. Joy came right back, saying that the way he framed it only fueled the very people who wanted to tear those systems down entirely. Not reform them, not fix them, but destroy them. And she had seen firsthand where that kind of thinking led. "So have I," he said. And in a twist that silenced the room again, he argued that true authoritarianism happens when people are told they are not allowed to question, that they must simply obey and believe whatever they're told, without thought or resistance. Joy closed her eyes for a long moment and took a steady breath. When she opened them again, her voice was calm. Too calm. She said they would have to agree to disagree. Cranston nodded, saying that was all he had wanted from the beginning. The freedom to disagree without being branded as reckless or dangerous. She offered a thin smile that never reached her eyes. Some disagreements come with real consequences, she said, and she refused to pretend they didn't just to maintain peace or keep a show running smoothly. She placed her notes on the table with finality. One of the hosts gently reached toward her and suggested a break, a reset, a commercial, anything to cool the moment. "No," she replied simply. She looked at the host, then at Cranston, and finally back into the camera. And then she said the words no one was prepared to hear. She wasn't just done with the conversation. She was done with the show. A wave of shock rippled through the audience. Cranston's eyes widened. He begged her to reconsider, saying it wasn't necessary. But she was already removing her microphone, explaining that she had given years of her life to the program and had loved it. But she could no longer continue participating in discussions that, to her, promoted ideas she fundamentally believed harmed society. The other hosts spoke over one another, pleading with her to take a break instead, to talk things out privately, to go to commercial. But she shook her head. Her decision had been made. She walked across the stage, handed her microphone to a stunned crew member waiting in the wings, and without looking back, continued toward the exit. The camera swung back to Cranston, still standing there, looking as if he had just witnessed a train wreck in slow motion. No one knew what to say. Finally, he sank back into his chair, running a hand through his hair, and muttered softly that this was never what he wanted to happen. One of the hosts leaned toward him and assured him they knew, but it was already over. The seat that Joy had occupied just minutes earlier now sat completely empty, a silent but powerful symbol of how far the conversation had gone and how badly it had spiraled out of control. Somewhere beyond those studio walls, a long-standing television figure was walking away from the show that defined her career. leaving behind stunned colleagues, a frozen audience, and a moment that would be replayed and debated for weeks to come. Now the question isn't just what happened, it's what happens next. Did Joy make the right call by walking away? Did Cranston push too hard, or was he simply refusing to back down from what he believed? And should conversations like this even exist on live television? Let us know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe, because this story is far from over,